Sarah Miller stood in front of her bedroom mirror, smoothing down the fabric of her best blue dress. The material stretched tight across her round hips and full belly, and she sighed deeply. At 28 years old, she had grown tired of the whispered comments and sideways glances that followed her wherever she went in the small town of Cedar Falls. "Sarah, honey, are you ready?" her mother called from downstairs. "Coming, Mama," Sarah replied, though her feet remained planted firmly on the worn wooden floor of her childhood bedroom. She had moved back home 3 years ago after losing her job at the textile factory in the next town over. The factory had closed down, leaving dozens of workers without income, and Sarah had been forced to return to the only place that would take her in. Her mother, Eleanor Miller, was a kind woman with silver hair and worried eyes. She had raised Sarah alone after her father died in a mining accident when Sarah was just 12. Eleanor worked as a seamstress, taking in mending and alterations from the townspeople, but the money was barely enough to keep food on the table and pay the rent on their small house at the edge of town. Sarah finally made her way downstairs, where her mother was waiting with a covered basket. The smell of freshly baked apple pie and warm dinner rolls filled the kitchen, making Sarah's stomach rumble despite her nerves. "You've outdone yourself again," Eleanor said, lifting the corner of the checkered cloth to peek at the golden brown rolls beneath. "Mrs. Henderson specifically asked if you'd be bringing your famous honey wheat bread." Sarah had always found comfort in cooking. While other girls her age had been learning to dance and flirt, she had been in the kitchen with her grandmother, learning the secrets of perfectly seasoned stew and flaky pie crust. Her grandmother, Nana Rose, had taught her that food was love made visible, and Sarah had taken those words to heart. "I made extra," Sarah said, adjusting the cloth over the basket. "And I brought some of that strawberry preserves we made last summer." The walk to the church was only 6 blocks, but it felt like miles under the weight of Sarah's anxiety. She knew what awaited her at the social. The same group of women who would smile sweetly to her face while whispering about her weight behind her back. The men who would politely taste her food and compliment her cooking skills, but would never think to ask her to dance. Cedar Falls was the kind of town where everyone knew everyone else's business. Sarah had grown up here, attended school here, and had watched all her classmates pair off and get married. She was now one of only 3 unmarried women over 25 in town, and the other 2 were the elderly Mitchell sisters who had never shown any interest in men. The church hall was already bustling with activity when Sarah and her mother arrived. Long tables covered with white cloths held dishes of every description: fried chicken, potato salad, green bean casserole, and at least a dozen different pies competed for space on the crowded surfaces. "Sarah, there you are." Mrs. Henderson rushed over, her gray curls bouncing with each step. "I was hoping you'd bring some of your baking. My Albert hasn't stopped talking about those dinner rolls you made for the harvest dinner last month." Sarah smiled and set her basket on the dessert table, carefully arranging her contributions among the other offerings. She noticed how the other women made room for her dishes, knowing from experience that Sarah's food would be among the first to disappear. "That smells heavenly," said a voice behind her. Sarah turned to find Rebecca Thompson, one of the younger married women in town. Rebecca was everything Sarah was not: tall, slender, with golden hair that always seemed to catch the light just right. She had married the banker's son 2 years ago and now lived in the big house on Maple Street. "Thank you," Sarah replied, tucking a strand of her dark brown hair behind her ear. "It's just the same recipe I always use." "Oh, but you have such a gift," Rebecca continued, her voice sweet as honey. "It's wonderful that you have such a talent. I'm sure some man will be very lucky to have a wife who can cook like you do." The words stung, though Sarah knew Rebecca meant them kindly. It was always the same. People praised her cooking, her kindness, her generous heart, but when it came to matters of romance, there was always an unspoken "but" hanging in the air. She was wonderful, but she was too large. She was sweet, but not pretty enough. She would make someone a good wife, but not someone from their town. Sarah excused herself and made her way to the kitchen, where she could help with serving and avoid the awkward conversations that seemed to follow her at every social gathering. Mrs. Patterson, the minister's wife, put her to work slicing pies and filling serving platters. "How's your mother's health been?" Mrs. Patterson asked, as they worked side by side. "She's doing well, thank you for asking," Sarah replied, though she noticed her mother had been more tired lately, and her fingers sometimes ached too much to do delicate sewing work. "She's blessed to have such a devoted daughter," Mrs. Patterson continued. "Not many young women would give up their own chances at marriage and family to care for their mothers." Sarah's hands stilled on the pie server. "I haven't given up anything, Mrs. Patterson. Of course not, dear. I just meant—" Mrs. Patterson trailed off, her cheeks reddening. "Well, you're still young. 28 isn't too old to start fresh somewhere new." The suggestion hung between them like a challenge. Start fresh somewhere new. Sarah had thought about it many times, especially in the dark hours of sleepless nights, when she wondered if she would spend her entire life in her childhood bedroom, watching other people build lives and families while she remained on the sidelines. But leaving would mean abandoning her mother, who depended on her more with each passing year. It would mean starting over with no money, no connections, and no guarantee that things would be any different in another town. The evening wore on with the usual activities. There were speeches from the mayor about community improvements, a performance by the church choir, and dancing to music played on Mrs. Cooper's old piano. Sarah helped serve food and clean dishes, staying busy enough to avoid the pitying looks she received whenever the dancing started. It was nearly 10 o'clock when she finally allowed herself to sit down with a cup of coffee and a small slice of her own apple pie. She found a quiet corner where she could watch the festivities without being noticed. "Excuse me, miss, is this seat taken?" Sarah looked up to find a man she didn't recognize standing beside her table. He was tall and lean, with sun-weathered skin and kind brown eyes. His clothes were clean but well-worn, and his hands bore the calluses of someone who worked outdoors. "No, please sit," Sarah said, gesturing to the empty chair across from her. "I'm Tom Bradley," he said, settling into the chair with a slight grimace that suggested sore muscles. "I just moved to the area about a month ago. Bought the old Peterson Ranch about 15 miles east of town." Sarah knew the Peterson place. It had been empty for nearly 2 years since old Mr. Peterson died, and his children moved to the city. The ranch had been one of the largest in the county, but it had fallen into disrepair in Peterson's final years. "I'm Sarah Miller," she replied. "Are you planning to raise cattle?" Tom nodded, his face lighting up with enthusiasm. "Cattle and some horses. The land's good, just needs some work. The house could use some attention too, but I figure I can tackle that over the winter months." "That's ambitious," Sarah said, genuinely impressed. "It must be lonely, living out there by yourself." "It is," Tom admitted, taking a sip of coffee. "But I've got big plans for the place. I want to build it back up to what it used to be, maybe even bigger." He paused, studying Sarah's face. "You know, I've been sampling the food here tonight, and I have to say, that apple pie is the best I've ever tasted." "Who made it?" Sarah felt her cheeks warm. "I did, actually." Tom's eyebrows rose in genuine surprise and appreciation. "You did? Well, I'll be. That's some exceptional baking. The crust is perfect, and the filling, it's like my grandmother's, but somehow even better." "Thank you," Sarah said, unused to such direct praise from a man she'd just met. "I learned from my grandmother, too. She always said the secret was to let the apples speak for themselves." "Smart woman," Tom said with a grin. "Would you mind if I asked for the recipe? I try to do my own cooking out at the ranch, but I'm afraid my skills don't extend much beyond beans and bacon." They talked for the next hour, and Sarah found herself more relaxed than she had been in months. Tom was easy to talk to, with a gentle sense of humor and genuine interest in what she had to say. He told her about his plans for the ranch, his previous work managing cattle operations in Texas, and his decision to start his own spread. "What made you choose Cedar Falls?" Sarah asked. "The land, mostly," Tom replied. "But also, the people. Everyone I've met has been helpful and welcoming. It's the kind of place where a man can put down roots and build something lasting." As the evening wound down and people began gathering their empty dishes and saying their goodbyes, Tom stood and offered Sarah his hand. "It was a pleasure meeting you, Miss Miller," he said. "I hope I'll see you again soon." Sarah shook his hand, noting the strength and warmth of his grip. "I'm sure you will." Cedar Falls is a small town, but as Tom walked away, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that this meeting was different somehow. For the first time in years, a man had sought out her company not because he wanted something from her, but because he seemed to genuinely enjoy talking with her. The walk home with her mother was quiet, each woman lost in her own thoughts. Eleanor had noticed the long conversation between her daughter and the newcomer, but she was wise enough not to comment immediately. "He seems like a nice young man," Eleanor finally said as they reached their front gate. "He does," Sarah agreed, trying to keep her voice neutral. "Single, from what I heard Mrs. Henderson saying." "Mama," Sarah warned, but her voice lacked conviction. "I'm just saying," Eleanor continued, with a small smile. "Sometimes the best things come when we least expect them." That night, Sarah lay in bed thinking about Tom Bradley and his plans for the Peterson Ranch. She thought about his enthusiasm when he talked about building something lasting, and the way his eyes had crinkled at the corners when he smiled. Most of all, she thought about how natural it had felt to talk with him, as if she'd known him for years instead of just one evening. But she also thought about the reality of her situation. Tom seemed like a decent man, but decent men didn't usually look twice at women like her. He had been polite and friendly. Nothing more. She would do well to remember that before she let her imagination run away with her. Still, as she drifted off to sleep, Sarah couldn't help but wonder what it would be like to cook for someone who appreciated good food, to share meals with someone who understood the love and care that went into each dish. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to dream of a different kind of future. The next morning brought her back to reality with the familiar routine of breakfast, chores, and helping her mother with the sewing work that provided their modest income. But throughout the day, Sarah found her thoughts drifting back to the rancher with the kind eyes and the appreciation for good apple pie. Little did she know that 15 miles away, Tom Bradley was having similar thoughts as he worked on repairing fence posts under the hot sun. He couldn't stop thinking about the woman with the gentle smile and the incredible baking skills, and he found himself wondering when he might have an excuse to visit Cedar Falls again. 2 weeks after the church social, Tom Bradley appeared at Sarah's front door on a Tuesday afternoon, hat in hand, and a sheepish expression on his weathered face. "Miss Miller," he said when Sarah answered the door, clearly surprised to see him. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all, Mr. Bradley," Sarah replied, smoothing her apron with nervous hands. "What brings you to town?" "Well, I needed supplies from the general store," Tom explained. "And I was wondering. That is, I was hoping you might consider giving me some cooking lessons. I know it's an unusual request, but I'm getting mighty tired of burned beans and charred bacon." Sarah blinked in surprise. In all her years, no one had ever asked her to teach them to cook. Well, I suppose I could help you with some basic recipes. I'd be happy to pay you for your time," Tom added quickly. "And I could bring meat from the ranch. I've got more beef than I know what to do with." Eleanor appeared behind her daughter, having heard the conversation from the kitchen where she'd been mending clothes. "Why don't you invite Mr. Bradley in for some coffee, Sarah? It's too hot to stand talking in the doorway." Over coffee and fresh-baked cookies, they worked out an arrangement. Tom would come to town every Saturday afternoon, bringing meat from his ranch, and Sarah would teach him basic cooking skills. In return, he would pay her a small fee and provide beef for the Miller household. "It'll help with the grocery bills," Eleanor pointed out after Tom had left. "And Lord knows we could use the extra money." But Sarah suspected her mother's enthusiasm had less to do with money and more to do with the fact that Tom had specifically sought out Sarah's company and expertise. The first cooking lesson the following Saturday was awkward. Tom's large hands seemed clumsy, with the delicate work of measuring flour and rolling dough. He burned the first batch of biscuits and oversalted the stew they attempted together. "I'm hopeless," he said, staring at the lumpy gravy he'd just produced. "Maybe I should just resign myself to eating in town every day." "Nonsense," Sarah said firmly. "Everyone can learn to cook. You just need practice and patience." She moved to stand beside him at the stove, guiding his hands as he stirred the gravy. "Feel that? The spoon should move smoothly through it. If it's lumpy, keep stirring, and add a little more milk." Tom was very still, as Sarah's smaller hands covered his, directing the motion of the spoon. He could smell her lavender soap and the faint scent of vanilla that always seemed to surround her from her baking. "There," Sarah said softly, stepping back as the gravy began to smooth out. "You're getting it." Over the following weeks, their Saturday lessons became the highlight of both their weeks. Tom proved to be a dedicated student, practicing the recipes Sarah taught him and reporting back on his successes and failures. Gradually, his skills improved, and so did their friendship. Sarah learned that Tom had grown up poor in Texas, the youngest of 6 children. He'd worked as a ranch hand since he was 14, saving every penny he could until he had enough to buy his own land. The Peterson Ranch represented years of hard work and careful planning. "I want to build something that lasts," he told her one afternoon as they worked together making bread. "Something I can be proud of. That maybe someday I can pass on to my children." The mention of children made Sarah's heart skip, though she tried to keep her expression neutral. "Do you want a large family?" "I'd like children, yes," Tom said, kneading the dough with the technique Sarah had taught him. "But more than anything, I want a partner. Someone to share the work and the dreams with. It gets lonely out there, especially in the evenings." Sarah understood loneliness all too well. Despite being surrounded by people in town, she often felt more isolated than Tom did on his ranch. At least his solitude was honest. Hers was hidden behind forced smiles and polite conversations with people who saw her as a useful spinster but never as a woman with her own desires and dreams. As autumn arrived, Tom began staying for supper after their cooking lessons. Eleanor always insisted, and Tom always accepted gratefully. These meals became precious to Sarah, giving her a taste of what it might be like to have a man at her table every day, someone who appreciated her cooking and enjoyed her conversation. Tom, for his part, found himself looking forward to Saturdays with an intensity that surprised him. Sarah's gentle humor, her patient teaching, and her obvious love for creating beautiful food drew him in ways he hadn't expected. He began to realize that his interest in her extended far beyond cooking lessons. The first sign of trouble came in late October. Sarah was in Patterson's general store, purchasing flour and sugar, when she overheard a conversation between Rebecca Thompson and Margaret Foster, the doctor's wife. "I think it's sweet how he's been coming to town every week," Rebecca was saying. "Poor man probably doesn't know how to cook for himself." "It's practical," Margaret replied. "Sarah's certainly the best cook in town. Though I do wonder what he really thinks of the arrangement." "What do you mean?" Margaret lowered her voice, but Sarah could still hear every word. "Well, a man like that could have his pick of women. He's handsome, owns his own ranch, and he's still young. Why would he settle for someone like Sarah when he could find a proper wife?" "Margaret, that's unkind." "I'm not being unkind, just realistic. Men like Tom Bradley don't marry women like Sarah Miller. He's probably just being polite, learning what he can, and eventually he'll find a suitable wife. Someone who can cook and, well, someone who looks the part of a rancher's wife." Sarah felt as if she'd been slapped. She quickly paid for her purchases and left the store, Margaret's words echoing in her mind. Someone who looks the part of a rancher's wife. The implication was clear. Someone tall and slender, and beautiful. Someone unlike her. That evening, Sarah was unusually quiet during supper. Tom noticed immediately. "You seem troubled," he said gently. "Is everything all right?" "Just tired," Sarah replied, though she could barely meet his eyes. Tom didn't believe her, but he didn't press. Instead, he helped clear the table and insisted on washing the dishes, while Sarah and her mother rested in the parlor. "That young man is smitten with you," Eleanor whispered once Tom was out of earshot. "Don't be ridiculous, Mama. I have eyes, Sarah. The way he looks at you. The way he finds excuses to touch your hand or stand close to you. He's courting you, whether you want to admit it or not." But Margaret Foster's words had planted seeds of doubt in Sarah's mind. Over the next few weeks, she found herself pulling back emotionally, keeping their interactions focused strictly on cooking. She was polite but distant, professional rather than warm. Tom noticed the change immediately, but couldn't understand what had caused it. Their lessons continued, but the easy camaraderie they developed seemed to have evaporated. Sarah no longer lingered to chat after teaching him a new recipe, and she stopped meeting his eyes when they worked side by side. Finally, in mid-November, Tom decided he had to address the issue directly. After they'd finished making a pot roast, he helped Sarah clean the kitchen in silence. When the last dish was dried and put away, he turned to face her. "Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I'd appreciate an honest answer." Sarah's heart began to pound. "Of course. Have I done something to offend you? These past weeks, you've been different. Distant. If I've overstepped somehow, I'd rather you tell me directly than continue with this politeness." Sarah twisted the dish towel in her hands, unable to look at him. "You haven't done anything wrong, Tom." "Then what is it?" I thought we'd become friends. At least." The pain in his voice broke something inside Sarah. She sank into a kitchen chair, the dish towel falling to her lap. "We are friends," she said quietly. "That's the problem." Tom pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. "I don't understand." Sarah took a deep breath, knowing she had to be honest, even if it meant embarrassing herself. "People are talking, Tom. About us. About why you spend so much time here. Let them talk. I don't care what people say, but I do." The words came out sharper than she intended. "I have to live in this town. I have to face these people every day, and they're saying that you're just being kind to me. That eventually, you'll find a proper wife. Someone suitable. Someone." Tom's eyes flashed with anger, but Sarah continued before he could speak. "And they're right, aren't they? You could have any woman you wanted. Someone beautiful and graceful. Someone who would look appropriate on your arm at social gatherings. Why would you want to tie yourself to someone like me?" Someone like you?" Tom's voice was dangerously quiet. Sarah gestured at herself with trembling hands. "Look at me, Tom. Really look at me. I'm 28 years old. I'm fat, and I've never even been courted properly. I'm not the kind of woman men dream of marrying." The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah stared at her hands, waiting for Tom to make some excuse and leave, to confirm what she already knew to be true. Instead, she heard the scrape of his chair as he pushed it back. Then, he was kneeling beside her chair, his calloused hands covering hers. "Sarah, look at me." Reluctantly, she raised her eyes to meet his. "Who told you that no man would want to marry you?" "No one had to tell me. It's obvious. I've lived here my whole life, and not one man has ever shown serious interest in me." "Then the men in this town are fools," Tom said fiercely. "You're beautiful, Sarah. You're kind and generous and talented. You have the most beautiful smile I've ever seen, and when you laugh, it lights up the whole room. You're exactly the kind of woman I dream of marrying." Sarah shook her head, tears beginning to fall. "You don't have to say that to make me feel better." "I'm not trying to make you feel better. I'm telling you the truth." Tom reached up to wipe away her tears with his thumb. "I've been trying to work up the courage to court you properly for weeks now. The cooking lessons were just an excuse to spend time with you. But I'm your what? Not some skinny little thing who'd blow away in a strong wind. Thank God for that. Do you know what I thought the first time I saw you at that church social?" Sarah shook her head mutely. "I thought, now there's a woman who knows how to take care of herself and others. I thought you looked like the kind of woman who could make a house into a home, who could stand beside a man through good times and bad. I thought you looked like someone I could love for the rest of my life." "Tom," Sarah whispered, "I don't want some delicate flower who'll faint at the sight of hard work. I want a partner, Sarah. I want you." Before Sarah could respond, the kitchen door swung open, and Eleanor entered, carrying a basket of mended clothes. She stopped short when she saw Tom kneeling beside Sarah's chair, both of them with tears in their eyes. "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt." "It's all right, Mrs. Miller," Tom said, standing but keeping one hand on Sarah's shoulder. "Actually, there's something I'd like to ask you." Eleanor set down her basket, her eyes moving between Tom and her daughter. "What is it, Mr. Bradley?" Tom straightened his shoulders and took a deep breath. "I'd like your permission to court your daughter properly, ma'am. With the intention of marriage, if she'll have me." Eleanor's face broke into a wide smile. "Oh my. Well, that is, Sarah is a grown woman. The decision is hers to make." Tom turned back to Sarah, who was staring at him in amazement. "What do you say, Sarah? Will you let me court you?" "The whole town will think you've lost your mind," Sarah said weakly. Tom's expression grew determined. "Then let me tell you exactly what I'll say to anyone who questions my choice." He took her hands in both of his voice strong and clear. "I'll tell them that I'm the luckiest man alive. I'll tell them that I've found a woman who can turn a simple meal into a feast, who treats everyone with kindness regardless of whether they deserve it, and who has enough love in her heart to fill a lifetime, Tom. And if they say anything about your appearance, I'll tell them that real beauty comes from the inside, and that you're the most beautiful woman I've ever met. Inside and out." Sarah felt more tears spilling down her cheeks, but these were different tears. For the first time in her life, someone was seeing her the way she'd always hoped to be seen. "But what if it doesn't work?" she whispered. "What if we're too different?" "Then we'll figure it out together," Tom said simply. "That's what people who love each other do." Love. The word hung in the air between them, precious and fragile. "Do you love me, Tom?" Sarah asked, her voice barely audible. "I do," he said without hesitation. "I love your gentle heart and your quick wit. I love the way you hum while you cook, and the way you always put others before yourself. I love how patient you were when I was learning to make bread, and how your face lights up when you taste something delicious. I love everything about you, Sarah Miller." Sarah looked into his honest brown eyes and saw nothing but truth there. For the first time in her life, she allowed herself to believe that she was worthy of love, that her dreams of partnership and family might actually come true. "I love you too," she whispered. Tom's face broke into a grin that transformed his entire appearance. "Is that a yes to the courting?" Sarah laughed through her tears, the sound bright and joyful. "Yes, Tom Bradley. Yes to the courting. Yes, to everything." And as Tom pulled her to her feet and into his arms, Sarah finally understood what her grandmother had meant about food being love made visible. Sometimes, love took the form of perfectly seasoned soup or flaky pie crust, but sometimes it looked like a man who saw past the surface to the heart beneath, who valued substance over appearance, and who wasn't afraid to speak his truth in the face of small-town gossip. From the doorway, Eleanor wiped away happy tears of her own, grateful that her daughter had finally found someone who appreciated the treasure she had always been. Word of Tom Bradley's courtship of Sarah Miller spread through Cedar Falls faster than butter on warm bread. By Sunday morning, it seemed the entire town knew that the handsome rancher had asked permission to court the Miller girl, and opinions were sharply divided. Some, like Mrs. Patterson and the older church ladies, were delighted. They had watched Sarah grow up, had tasted her cooking at every church function for years, and believed she deserved happiness. But others, particularly among the younger crowd and those who considered themselves the town's social leaders, were less enthusiastic. "It won't last," Margaret Foster declared to anyone who would listen. "Mark my words, he'll come to his senses soon enough." But Tom gave no indication that his feelings were temporary. He began calling on Sarah every Sunday afternoon, sitting in the Miller's tiny parlor and talking with her for hours. He brought her wildflowers from the ranch and helped Eleanor with heavy chores around the house. On Wednesday evenings, he escorted both women to church services, walking proudly with Sarah on his arm despite the whispers that followed them. Sarah blossomed under Tom's attention. The shy, self-conscious woman began to hold her head higher, to meet people's eyes directly, and to speak with more confidence. Her cooking, always excellent, seemed to reach new heights of creativity and flavor, as she experimented with recipes she thought Tom might enjoy. "You're glowing," Eleanor told her daughter one morning as they worked in their small garden, harvesting the last vegetables before winter set in. "I haven't seen you this happy since you were a child." Sarah straightened, wiping her hands on her apron, and smiled. "I feel like I'm finally becoming who I was meant to be, Mama. Does that sound foolish?" "Not at all, honey. Love has a way of bringing out the best in people." Their courtship continued through the winter months. Tom would arrive every Saturday morning in his wagon, often bringing supplies that the Miller household needed, but somehow never mentioning the cost. Sarah would pack basket lunches, and they would drive out to the ranch so she could see the improvements he was making. The Peterson place was slowly transforming under Tom's dedicated work. He had repaired the barn, fixed miles of fencing, and was gradually renovating the farmhouse. It was a modest, two-story building with a large kitchen and a front porch that faced the mountains. "It needs a woman's touch," Tom said one day as they stood in the kitchen, surveying the bare walls and simple furniture. "I can make it functional, but I don't have the knack for making it feel like home." Sarah walked through the rooms, already imagining curtains at the windows and her grandmother's dishes in the cupboards. The kitchen was spacious, with good light and room for a large table where a family could gather for meals. "It has good bones," she said finally. "It just needs some love." "That's what I was hoping you'd say." Tom moved to stand behind her, his hands resting gently on her shoulders. "Sarah, I know we've only been courting for 3 months, but I don't want to wait any longer to ask you something." Sarah's heart began to race as Tom turned her to face him. His expression was serious but warm, and she could see love and determination in his brown eyes. "Sarah Miller, will you marry me? Will you make this house into our home and build a life with me?" The word yes was out of her mouth before she'd fully processed the question. Tom's face broke into a grin, and he swept her up in his arms, spinning her around the empty kitchen while she laughed with pure joy. They set the wedding date for early spring, giving Sarah time to prepare and Tom time to finish the most essential improvements to the house. Eleanor threw herself into planning with enthusiasm, determined that her daughter would have the beautiful wedding she deserved. But not everyone in Cedar Falls was pleased with the engagement announcement. The gossip intensified, with some people openly questioning Tom's motives. Was he marrying Sarah for her cooking skills? Did he feel sorry for her? Was this some elaborate joke that would end with Sarah's humiliation? The whispers reached their peak one cold February afternoon when Sarah was in Patterson's general store, selecting fabric for her wedding dress. She had chosen a simple but elegant pattern in soft blue, knowing that white would not be flattering on her full figure. Rebecca Thompson was in the store as well, examining ribbons with her sister-in-law, when Dr. Foster's nephew arrived from the county seat. James Foster was a lawyer, tall and thin with a sharp face and sharper tongue. He had always considered himself too sophisticated for small-town life, and he made no effort to hide his disdain for what he saw as provincial thinking. "I hear congratulations are in order," James said to Sarah with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "When is the happy occasion?" "April 15th, Sarah replied politely, though something in his tone made her uncomfortable. "How wonderful," James continued. "Though I must say, I was surprised to hear the news. Bradley seems like an intelligent man. I wouldn't have thought he'd be so easily taken in." Sarah felt her cheeks burn, but she kept her voice steady. "I'm not sure what you mean, Mr. Foster." "Oh, come now. We all know what this is really about. The man needs someone to cook and clean for him, and you need security. It's a practical arrangement, nothing more." The store had grown quiet, with other customers pretending to examine merchandise while straining to hear the conversation. "That's not true," Sarah said, her voice beginning to shake despite her efforts to remain calm. James laughed, a cold sound that made several people wince. "My dear girl, let's be realistic. Men like Bradley don't fall in love with women like you. Oh, I'm sure he's fond of you in his way. You're useful, and I'm told you're an excellent cook. But love? Romance? Please." Sarah felt tears beginning to sting her eyes. But before she could respond, a deep voice cut through the tension like a blade. "I think there's been a misunderstanding here." Everyone turned to see Tom Bradley standing in the doorway of the store, his expression thunderous. He had clearly heard enough of the conversation to understand what was happening. "Bradley," James exclaimed with false heartiness. "I was just congratulating your fiancé on your upcoming nuptials." Tom walked slowly across the store until he stood beside Sarah, his arm sliding protectively around her waist. "Is that what you call it? Because it sounded more like you were insulting the woman I love." "Now see here," James blustered. "I was merely expressing my surprise at your choice. Surely you can understand that some people might question." "Question what?" Tom's voice was dangerously quiet. James glanced around the store, clearly enjoying having an audience for what he apparently saw as entertainment. "Well, your bride-to-be that is, she's not exactly what one would call suitable for a man in your position." "Suitable?" Tom repeated, his arm tightening around Sarah's waist. "What exactly do you mean by that?" "Come now, Bradley. You're an intelligent man. You own a successful ranch. You're handsome. You could have your pick of women. Why would you tie yourself down to someone who's so obviously, well, let's say she's not built for childbearing, if you catch my meaning? No man marries a round girl when he could have his choice of proper wives." The silence that followed was absolute. Sarah felt her heart breaking into 1,000 pieces. Not just from the cruelty of James's words, but from the humiliation of having her private insecurities aired in front of the entire store. Then Tom stepped forward, his body radiating controlled fury. "You want to know why I'm marrying Sarah?" Tom's voice carried clearly through the store, and Sarah realized that this moment would be repeated in every household in Cedar Falls before supper. "I'll tell you exactly why." He turned slightly so that he could look at Sarah while still addressing James and the gathered crowd. "I'm marrying Sarah because she's the most remarkable woman I've ever met. She can take simple ingredients and create meals that nourish not just the body, but the soul. She's patient enough to teach a stubborn rancher how to cook, kind enough to care for her aging mother without complaint, and generous enough to share her gifts with everyone in this town, even those who don't deserve it." Tom's voice grew stronger, more passionate, as he continued. "You say no man marries a round girl? Well, sir, this man is proud to marry this woman. Sarah has curves in all the right places, and every inch of her is beautiful to me. She's strong enough to work beside me, soft enough to comfort me, and smart enough to be my partner in every sense of the word." James opened his mouth to respond, but Tom wasn't finished. "You talk about childbearing? Sarah will be an extraordinary mother. She has enough love in her heart for a dozen children, and they'll be the luckiest kids in the world to have her. As for being suitable for my position, let me make something clear. She's not marrying down. I'm marrying up. Way up." Tom turned to face James directly, his brown eyes blazing. "But most importantly, Mr. Foster, I'm marrying Sarah because I love her. Not for what she can do for me, not for convenience or practicality, but because she makes me want to be a better man. Because when I'm with her, I feel complete. Because I can't imagine spending my life with anyone else." He looked back at Sarah, his expression softening into tenderness. "And if you or anyone else has a problem with my choice, you can keep it to yourself, because this woman is going to be my wife, and I'll defend her honor against anyone who dares to question it." The store erupted in a buzz of conversation as people began to disperse, some looking ashamed, others impressed by Tom's passionate declaration. James Foster muttered something about leaving for the county seat, and hurried out, his face red with embarrassment. Sarah stood frozen, overwhelmed by what had just happened. Tom had not only defended her but had done so with such conviction and love that she could hardly believe it was real. "Are you all right?" Tom asked quietly, his hands gentle on her shoulders. Sarah looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," Tom said firmly. "No one talks about my future wife that way. No one." Rebecca Thompson appeared beside them, her face flushed with emotion. "Sarah, I owe you an apology. We all do." "What?" Tom said. "It's beautiful, and it's true. You're lucky to have each other." Over the following days, the story of Tom's passionate defense of Sarah spread throughout Cedar Falls and beyond. Some people were touched by the obvious depth of his love, while others remained skeptical. But Tom and Sarah no longer cared about the gossip. They had each other. And that was enough. The wedding took place on a beautiful April morning, with the church filled to capacity. Sarah wore her blue dress with a crown of wildflowers in her hair, and she had never felt more beautiful. Tom stood waiting at the altar in his best suit, his face radiant with joy as she walked down the aisle. Eleanor cried throughout the ceremony, but they were happy tears. As she watched her daughter exchange vows with the man who loved her completely, she thanked God for bringing Tom Bradley into their lives. I, Thomas Bradley, take you, Sarah Miller, to be my wife, Tom said, his voice strong and clear. I promise to love you, honor you, and cherish you for all the days of my life. I promise to see your beauty every day, to appreciate your gifts, and to stand beside you through whatever comes. Sarah's vows were equally heartfelt, her voice steady despite her tears. I, Sarah Miller, take you, Thomas Bradley, to be my husband. I promise to love you with all my heart, to support your dreams, and to make our house a true home. I promise to cook for you with love every day of our lives. The reception was held in the church hall, with tables groaning under the weight of dishes contributed by the townspeople. But everyone agreed that Sarah's wedding cake was the finest they had ever tasted. 3 layers of vanilla sponge with fresh strawberries and cream, decorated with sugar flowers that looked almost real. As the evening wound down, Tom and Sarah prepared to leave for their new home. The ranch house now sparkled with fresh paint, new curtains, and furniture that Tom had carefully selected with Sarah's preferences in mind. Are you ready, Mrs. Bradley? Tom asked, offering his arm. I'm ready, Sarah replied, and she meant it completely. Their first months of marriage were an adjustment, but a joyful one. Sarah threw herself into making the ranch house a true home, while Tom worked to expand the cattle operation. They developed routines that accommodated both their needs. Early morning coffee together before Tom headed out to work, Sarah packing hearty lunches for him, and long evenings spent planning improvements to the ranch and sharing dreams for their future. By autumn, Sarah was pregnant with their first child, and Tom's joy was so complete that he could hardly contain himself. He had been right about Sarah's mothering instincts. She approached pregnancy with the same care and attention she brought to everything else. I told you she'd be perfect for childbearing, Eleanor said one evening as she helped Sarah with some sewing, patting her daughter's growing belly with satisfaction. Their son was born the following spring, a healthy baby with Tom's brown eyes and Sarah's gentle disposition. They named him Samuel, and Tom insisted that Sarah's cooking skills had contributed to his robust health. As the years passed, the Bradley family grew to include 3 more children, and the ranch prospered under Tom's management and Sarah's careful household administration. Sarah's reputation as the finest cook in the county attracted visitors from far and wide, and she began selling her preserves and baked goods to supplement the ranch income. The children grew up knowing they were deeply loved and valued for who they were, not how they looked. Sarah made sure of that, remembering too well the pain of feeling inadequate. The Bradley home became known throughout the region for its warmth, hospitality, and incredible food. Years later, when people told the story of Tom and Sarah Bradley, they always mentioned the day in Patterson's store when Tom declared his love so passionately. It became a legend in Cedar Falls, the day a good man stood up to small-minded thinking and proved that real love sees beyond surface appearances to the heart beneath. And every night, as Tom and Sarah sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold, they remembered how it all began with a church social, a piece of apple pie, and the courage to believe that love comes in many forms. Sarah never forgot James Foster's cruel words, but she also never forgot Tom's response. In defending her so completely, he had given her something more precious than love. He had given her the unshakable knowledge of her own worth. The woman who had once believed herself unworthy of love became a pillar of strength in her community. Known for her kindness, her incredible cooking, and her unwavering support of others who felt different or outcast, she and Tom raised their children to judge people by their character rather than their appearance, and the Bradley family became an example of what was possible when love triumphed over prejudice. Tom never regretted his passionate declaration in the general store. In fact, he was proud of it. He had spoken his truth in defense of the woman he loved, And he would do it again without hesitation. Sarah was everything he had said she was and more. A loving wife, a devoted mother, a brilliant cook, and his best friend. And every time he looked at his beloved wife, whether she was kneading bread in their kitchen, reading to their children by the fire, or simply smiling at him across the dinner table, Tom Bradley knew he was the luckiest man alive. He had found his perfect match. Not despite her curves, but because of everything she was: generous, talented, beautiful, and most importantly, his.